14-year-old British Columbia teenager Reena Virk struggled to fit in. She was relentlessly bullied from elementary school all the way to high school. Self-conscious about her looks and struggling with her strict religious parents' rules, times were tough. So on November 14, 1997, when she received a phone call inviting her out to a social gathering, she gladly accepted. She had no idea the invite was all a part of a revenge plan, retaliation for spreading rumors about one of the other girls. Shortly after arriving, she was swarmed by a group of 8 teenagers and severely beaten. When she tried to stumble home, 2 of them followed her and dragged her down below a bridge, where they continued to beat her before drowning her in the water. Reena's brutal murder at the hands of a group of teens prompted people across the country to take a closer look at growing violence and bullying amongst young Canadians, and it's a reminder of the importance of raising an empathetic, caring future generation. Canada is seen by a lot of the rest of the world as very safe and friendly, which is true, but Canada certainly isn't immune to violence, bullying, and murder. I was 11 years old when the story of the brutal murder of 14-year-old Reena Virk was front page of every newspaper. She was so young, and to be killed so violently by a gang of her peers, it was shocking. But it was also a wake-up call for a lot of Canadians that we aren't always as friendly, welcoming, and accepting as we think we are. It was as confronting back then as it is today, which is why I felt it was important to talk about this case in 2024. Reena Virk was born on March 10, 1983, to her parents Suman and Manjit Virk, who had immigrated to Canada from India and were now living in Saanich, British Columbia. She was the eldest of 3 children and spent much of her early years living in the community of View Royal, a community of more than 11,000 residents in Greater Victoria. Unlike most other families of Indian descent in Canada who practice Hinduism and Sikhism, Reena's parents converted to become Jehovah's Witnesses when she was a child. Because of this, I've read that her family was described as being a minority within a minority. The rules at home were very, very strict, as Reena's parents were devout Jehovah's Witness. No smoking, no swearing, no slurring, no celebrations of holidays or special days like birthdays. Certain music and clothing are banned. For a teenage girl, it would have been difficult to follow because it wasn't a path she would have chosen for herself, and Reena had already struggled with her self-confidence in dealing with bullies. As early as middle school, Reena was bullied because of the way she looked and her race. She began to change. She became angry and depressed, even picking fights at school with the other kids. Being relentlessly bullied, especially from such an early age, changes the very fabric of who a person is. It broke her parents' hearts to watch their beautiful daughter come home from school each day and fall apart in front of them, emotionally drained from what she had endured that day. In 1994, when Reena was 11 years old, they decided to move to a different neighborhood where she could attend a different school. They enrolled her at Burnside Elementary School, and at first things seemed to be getting better. It was a fresh start, a chance to start over and make friends. Their daughter appeared to be settling in well. She seemed happy. Unfortunately, that happiness was short-lived, as one of her closest new friends turned her back on her and the bullying resumed. When she graduated to middle school, Reena found her place with a group of rebellious preteens. They were kids who liked to drink, smoke, and push back against authority. And because Reena was desperate to fit in wherever she could, she changed to join this circle. It was also a way for her to protest her parents' strict religious rules. She started to drink, smoke, and push back against authority right along with them, as her parents desperately tried to keep her on the straight and narrow. They would remind her of the rules she was to follow as a Jehovah's Witness and read her scriptures, which only made Reena want to rebel even more. She wanted out of her parents' home any way possible, and she was about to do something that would shock her entire family. I want to note here that Reena's father holds no ill will against her for what she did, and so neither should we. She was a very lost young girl who struggled to find her way amidst constant bullying. Because of her parents' strict religion, she wasn't finding the support she desperately needed or wanted at home. In her young, naive mind, she felt it would be better if she lived elsewhere away from her parents. So she made up a lie, a horrific lie that would tear their family apart. At 13 years old, Reena accused her father of sexually abusing her. She claimed that she was being physically, mentally, and sexually abused at home. One particularly horrendous story she told involved being hit with a hammer, tied to a chair, and threatened with a heated barbecue utensil. When a child tells a story like this, they should be immediately believed, and she was. Her father, Manjeet, was arrested on charges of sexual abuse. She was removed from her parents' custody and placed with her grandmother for a short time. When this living situation didn't work out, Reena was placed into foster care. I want to note here that Reena's father denies these allegations, and the charges were later dropped because Reena admitted she had lied. Her family was seriously concerned that she was making up these stories just to get away from them, so they pushed for a full investigation to be done. If Reena was claiming to be hurt, and they weren't the ones doing it, maybe someone else was. Unfortunately, Reena remained in foster care while none of her claims were investigated or corroborated by other sources. As you can imagine, things did not improve for Reena in foster care. She wasn't given the freedom she so desperately wanted. She missed her family. While she had admitted to authorities that she lied about the abuse, she was forced to continue to live at the foster home. Still, she tried to fix the broken relationship she now had with her parents in hopes of someday being able to return home, even asking her foster family if she could spend the night at her parents' every so often. Her family wasn't perfect, but she needed their love and support more now than ever. The bullying at school had only escalated. Her father would say that classmates would put gum in her hair, tease her about her appearance, and threaten to beat her up. Recently, she had been accused by some of the other local teen girls of spreading rumors. One of these girls accused Reena of trying to steal her boyfriend. Teenagers, in particular teenage girls, can be vicious. Typically, they aren't as physically violent as teenage boys, but any female who has gone to high school with other females knows that they can destroy you to the core through lies and manipulation. In a letter to the Globe and Mail, Reena's father wrote, "I still remember the psychological scars Reena's school bullies left on her. She would cry, knowing that her friends weren't really her friends. She would plead to stay home from school altogether. But her self-esteem had been so wounded that her family's love wasn't enough. She craved acceptance by her friends and needed it so badly that despite the risks, she carried on. All the way to that fateful day at Craigflower Bridge in Saanich." Which brings us to Nov 14, 1997. Reena was going to be spending the night at her family home. She was at her parents' house when she received a phone call inviting her to a gathering. It was Friday night, and this was something that happened most Fridays, except Reena wasn't typically invited to participate. She was excited just to be included, so off she went to the field behind Shoreline High School, where Reena had previously attended. A large group of around 50 or 60 teens was there socializing, drinking, and smoking. She only knew a handful of the teens there, but she wanted more than anything to make friends. The police would show up due to a noise complaint, and the group dispersed, moving the party over to the Craigflower Bridge. This is where everything would come to a head. Suddenly, a group of 7 teenage girls and one boy formed around Reena, screaming at her about the alleged rumors and calling her vicious names. According to one of the girls, Reena had recently stolen her notebook, which had the phone numbers of several boys, and told them lies about her, including that she had AIDS, her eyebrows were fake, and she was ugly. This girl was furious when she found out and hatched this plan with her other friends to make Reena pay for what she did. One of the girls put a burning cigarette out on Reena's forehead as the others began to repeatedly punch and kick her. Once this fight broke out, many teens at the gathering decided to take off, not wanting to get into any kind of trouble, while others moved closer so that could watch the attack. No one stepped in to put a stop to the fight or help Reena. According to one teen who stayed, Reena was crying out that she was sorry, but the attacks continued. She lay on the ground, bloody and battered, but eventually was allowed to get up and try to get away. She tried limping her way across the bridge towards her home, where she could get help, but 2 of the teens, 15-year-old Kelly Allard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky, weren't going to let her get away so easy. They followed her and grabbed her before she could escape. Reena was further punched and kicked. Her head was smashed against a tree, and then she was dragged towards the water under the bridge. To ensure she would not get up again, her head was held under the water until she stopped moving. She would not make it home to her parents that night. Instead, she lay under the bridge, out of sight to anyone who happened to pass by. While Suman and Manjeet Virk worried about where their daughter was, eventually reporting her as missing to the police, students at Shoreline High School began to talk. Many who witnessed the group attack had seen Reena get up and leave, so they assumed things had ended there. But it wasn't long before whispers about how Reena Virk was no longer alive began to make their way through the halls. Allegedly, a pact was made between the 7 teenage girls and one boy who had beaten her. No one was to talk about what had happened that night, because they all could be implicated in her death. Meanwhile, Reena's parents pleaded with the police to take their daughter's disappearance seriously, because she was a 14-year-old girl who had a history of rebellion and troubling behavior. The police believed it was very likely she had run away and would eventually pop back up. 2 Russian sisters who lived at the same foster home as Reena decided to call in a tip to the police when they heard the rumors that she was most likely dead. It would take 8 days for the police to locate Reena. Her battered, half-nude body was found in the water under the bridge. While many of the young teens were already aware of Reena's fate, her parents were learning about the violence inflicted upon her for the very first time. They were devastated. An autopsy would reveal that Reena had sustained multiple blows to her abdomen, and she had extensive injuries to her face and head, even a bruise in the shape of a sneaker found on the back of her brain. Ultimately, Reena died from being drowned. Pebbles were found in her lungs, indicating she was still alive when her head was pushed into the water. It was noted that if she had not been drowned, she likely would have died from the other extensive injuries to her body. Her body had sustained injuries that were as severe as if she had been in a car accident. It was shocking, and the community was not prepared to learn who amongst them had done something so evil. Thankfully, teenagers talk, and this horrific secret that they had tried so desperately to keep quiet came to light. The police quickly learned about the fight that had broken out at the gathering under the bridge. There were a ton of witnesses who saw firsthand the brutal beatdown of Reena Virk. The group of 7 females and 1 boy were quickly identified, and the story of how 2 of these teens continued to follow and kill Reena was revealed. It was 15-year-old Kelly Allard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky who had dealt the final blows. What would cause this group to so violently turn on a girl they hardly knew? Why would 2 teens, Kelly and Warren, follow Reena to ensure she was dead? It all started just a few months before the gathering under the bridge. Kelly, who came from a middle-class, loving and stable family, had found a close friendship with a troubled teen girl who had not been identified due to her age at the time. Together, they were dangerous. They were mean girls who wanted to grow up to become career criminals and join the mob. They would listen to violent music and draw sketches of cops being killed by gangsters. They had a twisted, morbid perception of the world. Reena would have given anything to be included in that world. She so desperately wanted to fit in with this kind of group, no matter how toxic it was. Reena was insecure, jealous, and vulnerable, which is why she allegedly took the unidentified teen's notebook and called the boys in it to spread rumors about her. This teen, along with her best friend Kelly, plotted revenge against Reena, deciding that they would beat her up at the Friday night group gathering. Most of the other teens in attendance had no idea about this revenge plot. They were just there to hang out. But when the fight finally broke out, 6 other girls and 1 boy who didn't even know Reena decided to jump in. Mob mentality. No one stepped in to put a stop to the beating or to help, but ultimately it was Kelly Allard and Warren Glowatsky who murdered Reena Virk. Shockingly, Warren didn't even know Reena. He blindly participated in the beatdown. Growing up in a broken home, Warren claimed to be a part of the Crips, a street gang based out of California. His mother was an alcoholic. His father had abandoned him to move to the States with a woman he met in Vegas, and at the time of the murder, he was living with a friend. He was an angry teenager who found belonging with the troubled crowd. At this time, in the late 90s in the Victoria, BC area, the teenage subculture was heavily influenced by Los Angeles street gangs. It was considered cool and trendy to be a criminal, a gangster. That's why no one batted at an eye this mob of teenagers viciously beating 1 girl. When the police interviewed Warren, he turned on Kelly right away, claiming that he had followed Reena and helped to drag her back under the bridge. But he alleged that it was Kelly who had held Reena's head under the water to drown her. Kelly denied everything, instead saying that it was all just a rumor and she was being used as a scapegoat. Kelly claimed Reena's killer was probably her friend, the unidentified teen who had her notebook stolen. She maintained this position, even though so many other teens who were present named her specifically as the one who did it, including Warren. Even though they were minors, because of the extreme nature of the crime, Kelly and Warren were arrested and charged with aggravated assault and murder. The 6 other girls who had taken part in the group beating, forever dubbed the Shoreline Six, would be charged as youths. Their identities would be withheld, including the girl who allegedly had her notebook stolen by Reena, sparking this entire situation. 3 of the girls plead guilty to assault causing bodily harm, while the other 3 fought their charges at trial but were still found guilty. Kelly and Warren's aggravated assault and murder trials could not have gone any more differently. Warren was represented by a public defender because he couldn't afford his counsel. He took responsibility for his role in Reena's murder. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and received a life sentence. But the positive here is that while he was behind bars, he participated in a restorative justice program which has a goal of reconciling offenders and victims. It was during one of these sessions that he was able to meet Reena's parents and apologize to them face to face. He acknowledged to them what he had done, admitted he was wrong, and even exchanged hugs with both her mother and father. I'm not sure that I could be so forgiving, but I have never had to deal with the grief of losing a child. Reena's parents supported his request for full parole, which he received in 2010. As for Kelly, it would take 3 trials and many years to finally convict her for her actions. In March of 2000, she went to trial for the first time and pleaded not guilty. This pretty young girl showed up to court all buttoned up, with her well-established family standing behind her and supporting her. They hired the best lawyer that money could buy, who argued that there was no physical evidence to tie Kelly to Reena's murder. This was true. The prosecution didn't have any fingerprints or DNA. However, they had a mountain of witnesses who claimed they saw Kelly viciously beating Reena, including Warren, who claimed he was standing there when Kelly forced Reena's head under the water. According to Kelly and her lawyers, these were simply rumors. The jury found her guilty, and she was convicted of second-degree murder. However, the ruling was short-lived. She successfully appealed the conviction because she had been improperly questioned and did not receive a fair trial. While waiting for a new trial, she was released from prison, and this is when she assaulted a 58-year-old woman in a park. With this new charge, she was sent back to prison to wait for her second trial. 4 years later, her second trial would begin. Again, she denied any wrongdoing and claimed that she was being used as a scapegoat. According to Kelly, it was others in the group who had killed Reena. A mistrial was declared due to the jury being deadlocked. Unfortunately for Reena's family, who have already had to deal with all of these other trials, there would need to be a third for Kelly. This time, in April of 2005, Kelly was reconvicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life with no eligibility for parole for 7 years. She appealed and the conviction was overturned, but this time the Supreme Court of Canada stepped in and reinstated the conviction and sentence. During her time in prison, she was anything but well-mannered and received a dozen infractions, including her attempts to make shivs out of toothbrushes. Behind bars, she became a pen pal with a 41-year-old former felon, whom she was allowed to have conjugal visits with, which, in my opinion, should never be a thing for a person convicted of murder. She became pregnant and had her first baby behind bars. During all 3 of her trials and the majority of her prison sentence, Kelly continued to deny her involvement in Reena's murder. However, she had a change of heart when it was time for her parole hearing. This time, she admitted that she had participated in some of the beatings and she was there down by the water with Reena, but she wasn't trying to drown her. She simply wanted to splash some water on her face to see if she could get her to regain consciousness. She claimed that she had changed since the birth of her son. Kelly changed her name to Carrie Sim and had a second baby behind bars as a result of a conjugal visit with her boyfriend. While she appealed for full parole, she was denied, but she has been given day parole as part of a program to eventually reintegrate her back into the community. In 2016, a risk assessment found that Kelly has a moderate to high moderate risk of future violence, so thankfully she hasn't been fully released back into the public. As for Reena's parents, over the years since their daughter was so carelessly taken from them by a group of violent teens, They turned their trauma and pain into the driving force behind their anti-bullying campaign. They pushed for the government to crack down on teen violence and bullying in schools. They toured around to different schools, sharing the tragic story of what happened to their daughter at the hands of her peers. In a cruel twist of fate, Reena's mother, Suman, would pass away due to a choking accident that happened while she was dining at a restaurant. She was just 58 years old. But her message to greet others with the open hand instead of the fist is just as relevant then as it is today. Reena's memory can be honored by acknowledging the mistakes, wrongdoings, and negligence of the past and creating change through simple actions every day of your life. There is just as much bullying in schools today as there was in the 90s. Things are a bit different now with the internet and social media, but the ramifications of what this does to children and teens are just as serious. No one can solve the bullying problem by themselves, but you can help by teaching your children to be kind, emphatic, and an individual who thinks for themselves and stands up when they see something wrong. If anyone had stood up and helped Reena, maybe tried to get help and called 911, she'd probably still be alive today, having just turned 41 years old. Collectively, as a society, we need to do better.